I have lived long enough to learn that some words are knives pretending to be observations. "You're too old," he said, as easily as he might have said, "Pass the salt," and my ribs felt briefly like a row of hard-boiled eggs lined up for inspection. I did not answer him. I have another rule, older than the ache in my knees. When anger is hot, I let it boil a little away from the food. I will not season the day with it. The boy, he is a man by the calendar and a boy by the way his shoulders begged for applause, was named Jonah. He had a talent for talking in bullet points and a secret fondness for mending chairs when nobody was looking. I knew that because I had seen him with a wrench and a face like someone apologizing to a bolt that had done its best. We met properly the day he brought a brown box to the fellowship hall and set it on the table with both hands, like he was asking the table to sign for it. "I need a favor," he said, "just for a while." He wouldn't sit. Some requests prefer the vertical. He slid an envelope from the box, heavy for its size, sealed with tape that respected itself. "Keep this," he said, "and if anyone asks for it, tell them you don't have it." He tried to smile. His mouth did paperwork. His eyes begged confidentiality. I asked the question my husband trained into me like a good posture. "Is there anyone I should call if you don't come back?" Jonah gave me a number, then a second number, then the look of a man who has finally understood that numbers are not the same as names. "Thank you," he said, and then, as if the thanks had made him brave, he added, "And if there's a meeting about the budget next week, I think it's probably time for, new blood." He did not look at my hands when he said new. He looked past me toward a future that might applaud on cue. When the meeting came, he said it out loud where the minutes could hear him. "We need younger leadership. The pace is too slow. We're carrying weight we don't need. With respect, Nana, you are too old to head this project." The word respect cracked like thin ice under a heavy step. I looked around the table. People pretended their pens had emergencies. I told the truth that did not set me on fire. "You may be right about the pace," I said. "It is slower than ambition, but I will not apologize for the speed of trust." I did not mention the envelope resting like a sleeping bird in my locked drawer. After the meeting, I took my temper to morning porch, where Anna teaches hot water how to be comfort and not just chemistry. She listened the way a door listens when it truly means welcome. "A grudge," she said, "is a blanket you keep pulling up to your chin. A boundary is the window you open so the room can breathe." She poured me something that tasted like gratitude did when it first learned manners. "Keep the envelope," she said. "Don't keep the insult. One will rot your pocket. The other might rip it open in time to let something good fall out." I walked to the bench with the brass plaque, because that bench has a way of translating me to myself. "The next right thing," it says, in letters that have kept their shape through far more weather than mine. I sat. I smiled at a pigeon who looked like he wanted to negotiate rent. I decided. I would keep Jonah's secret safe, not because he deserved me, but because I deserve me. I do not spend my character like small change. The envelope was light and heavy by turns, depending on how many memories I loaded onto it. I have kept other people's promises until they remembered to pick them up. I have held confessions while the confessor went to get a glass of water and courage. I have kept one secret too long, the one my mother asked me to keep about my father's last words, and I have forgiven myself for the harm that kept. So when I put Jonah's envelope in my drawer, I did it with ceremony. A folded square of lavender paper beneath it for blessings, my husband's pen above for clarity, and the drawer itself cleaned of receipts that served only nostalgia. I could have opened it. I could have told myself a careful lie about stewardship and contingencies. I could have held it up to the light the way I hold my own heart up to the afternoon, searching for cracks that need glue. I did not. I wrote his name on a small card and the date, and a sentence that was a promise and a warning to myself. Do not be curious with what is not yours. Be courageous with what is. The week did its ordinary work. Kettles, chairs, socks waiting in their bins for the feet that would need them. Jonah's big project, an ambitious plan to remake our little pantry into something that could impress a grant committee, began to wobble where any brand new idea wobbles, at the seam between vision and trash day. He spoke faster. He slept less. He put his goodness in a museum case and hoped we would all come admire it. I did what I do best. I carried chairs, asked better questions, refused to praise what hadn't learned to be kind yet. At listening night, I told a story about words that cut and the way we sometimes wield them like scalpels when we are not licensed to operate. I didn't say Jonah's name. People nodded with their eyes, which is the only kind of nod I trust. Near the door, Jonah stood with his hands in his pockets, punching his knuckles into worry like dough. When the circle closed, he almost left. Then he didn't. He waited until most of the chairs had remembered where they belonged. Is it safe? He asked. He meant the envelope. Yes, I said. And so am I. He looked at my face to see if I was lying. I am too old to lie and remember the choreography. He nodded and left in the direction of trouble and breakfast. Around midnight, the phone rang with the particular apology of an unslept hour. Nana, he said, do you still have it? I said yes. He swallowed the way a boy swallows when there's a marble in his throat and he's not ready to admit it. Thank you, he said, and then, I'm sorry. The kind that has not learned to conjugate itself yet. I told him there was a chair with his name on it and a kettle that did not believe in shame. He did not come. So I spoke to the envelope instead. I told it what I told my husband's jacket after he was gone, and I could not stop touching the lining. Today we learned again that love and dignity share a spine. I told it that I had been called too old, and had felt for a moment like a museum exhibit, preserved, admired, irrelevant. I asked the envelope to forgive Jonah before he did the math. I promised it I would not open it for the thrill of knowing. There are thrills I am too adult to afford. The morning brought a headline written in the sharp font Trouble prefers. Jonah's workplace had done him unkindly. A roomer wearing his name had found a microphone. I brewed tea and did not turn on the television. When you love a person, you do not stand outside their burning house with popcorn. You ask where the water is. Anna called from morning porch, with that voice she uses when she's passing a picture through the phone. Come here, she said. I have a story for your restraint. She told me about a kettle that whistles only when the lid is turned just so. Every time I'm about to pry, she said, the lid says no music until you wait. She laughed at herself and taught me patience again without calling it a lesson. That afternoon, a girl walked into the hall who had Jonah's eyebrows and his habit of holding her breath just past the point of useful. I'm looking for Nana, she said, and I said, you have found me. And the way her shoulders fell told me I had been the right landmark. She told me her name was Lark. She did not sit. He told me, she said, if he didn't come in 3 days, I should ask for an envelope. I know that is a strange sentence. I know what it sounds like. She looked at the floor, because sometimes tile is kinder than faces. He said you would make me tea before you made any decisions. I made the tea. I put a saucer under the cup because steadiness is not always a virtue, but it is often a kindness. Tell me what you want with the envelope, I said, at the speed of your breathing. She told me about a mother who was wonderful and then gone, about a custody plan delayed by a clerk with a cold, about couch surfing dressed like a youth program, about a brother who had learned to speak in meetings the way scared people learn to speak to bouncers, loudly and with a list. He is not cruel, she said. He is a person carrying a piano upstairs by himself, and the neighbours are mad about the noise. What is in the envelope? I asked. Paper, she said. Paper that makes someone listen. Paper that says Jonah is not pretending to be my parent. He is practicing. She looked up hard at me then, because begging is exhausting. If he said you can give it to me, then I ask. If he did not, then I do not ask. I only stand here and be 20 and try not to shake my future out onto the floor. I kept the envelope in the drawer. I kept Lark in the room. We called the number that answers when the city is tired of its own paperwork. And we asked what a guardian needs at 4 p.m. on a weekday when the bus is late and the office is allergic to urgency. We learned that kindness occupies a desk in a building with no money for better chairs. We made a plan that did not require any seals to be broken. Lark drank the tea like a person at sea, learning what fresh water tastes like. She left steadier. The envelope stayed. That evening, Jonah arrived looking like a person who had tried to outrun himself and found himself waiting at the corner. He stood in the doorway the way regret stands, mouth opening and closing, hands empty, eyes too busy to be brave yet. Do you have it? He asked. I nodded. He didn't ask to see it. He asked to sit. I have seen miracles that introduced themselves more loudly and mattered less. We sat on the second row of chairs because the first row is for people who need to feel the floor. He told me the rumour, which I will not repeat because rumours survive on repetition, and I will not be a greenhouse for weeds. He told me about a thing he did not do, and a mistake he did make, thinking he could carry Lark's safety like a secret basketball under his sweatshirt while playing a public game of competence. I said you were too old, he added finally, in a whisper that understood at last the cost. I said it because I am too young at being scared. I wanted the room to trust me because I didn't. Ah, I said. The old trick of trying to outsource our self-respect. He laughed miserably. Yes, he said. That one. He rubbed his face like it might be a chalkboard that would let itself be erased. Did you open it? He asked. I did not, I said. I kept your secret, so it would not have to keep you. He let a sound out that might have become a sob if it had not been raised in a house where boys were taught to say, I'm fine, in the tone of a fault line. You can, he said finally. Open it. With me. I can't do it alone. We walked to my drawer like two people approaching a lion that has promised to behave. I took out the envelope. He put his hands on the table to keep them from telling the room too many stories. He nodded. I slid a butter knife under the tape because even a secret deserves not to be torn. Inside, a stack of forms that looked like patients wearing a tie, a copy of a letter to a judge saying plainly what Lark needed and what Jonah could give, a notarized paper with more stamps than a childhood summer, and a smaller sealed note with my name written in blue. Read yours, he said. I did. Nana dash dash. If you are reading this, it means I asked for help out loud. Thank you for surviving to be the adult I needed when I thought the word adult meant the person with the loudest voice. If you kept this sealed, please destroy the draft I left with my friend. I only want the true one to live. If you opened it early, forgive yourself. You were trying to turn the lights on. If I am late, please give Lark tea and my apology. If I have said anything cruel to you in public, it was only because I was trying not to cry in front of people who still think crying is an exit interview for manhood. I am learning. J. He watched my face as if my eyebrows were a weather report. You wrote this before you told me I was too old, I said softly. He nodded. Fear has very bad timing, he said. So does shame. He touched the forms like they had a pulse. Will you come with me tomorrow to the place where these become less like paper? Yes, I said, but I will not hold the pen for you. He smiled the first real smile of the day. Good, he said. That would be creepy. We put the papers back in the envelope with manners. He carried the weight like a man who had learned that heavy is not the same as impossible. At the door, he turned. Nana, he said, if you want me to resign from the project, I will. I thought about it. I am too old to punish when what I want is repair. I want you to apologize, I said, in the same room where you shortened me to make yourself taller. I want you to return the inches you stole. He nodded, relief and dread shaking hands behind his eyes. Yes, he said. I can do that. He left. I locked the door and sat with the drawer open, breathing the smell of paper that had just decided to become a life. The next morning, we walked into a building where hope wears lanyards and tired smiles. A clerk with a heroic bun took the papers and did not roll her eyes even once. Another clerk asked Lark questions in a voice that understood that the right to be a child is not something you earn, it is something you are owed. Jonah signed. Lark signed. A stamp came down with a sound that made my ribs think of drumlines and parades. He looked at me like a boy at a window where snow has finally kept its promise. Thank you, he said, and this time the word was the right size. On the way out, we saw a bulletin board where worries go when they need a companion. I pinned a small card. If you are here and scared, ask for Nana at the church on Grove. We have chairs and a kettle that keep their vows. I did not sign my last name. Some advertisements are better hand-delivered. That afternoon, Jonah stood up in the meeting he had once used as a stage. He did not bring slides. He brought his throat. Last week I said something unkind to Nana, he said. The room stilled. Pens forgot how to lie. I said it because I was scared, and I wanted to look brave. That is not bravery. That is theatre, and I am done with it. He looked at me and did not ask me to rescue him with a benevolent nod. I am asking to keep working, he said, but not to be in charge. I am asking to learn at the pace of trust. He sat. His hands trembled openly, which is another way to teach a room. I spoke after him because I wanted the narrative to walk where it needed to, not sprint where it wasn't safe. Age, I said, is not a credential, and it is not an indictment. It is a biography. Mine says I have carried chairs longer than I have carried grudges. Jonah has work to do. So do I. We will do it together in public, which is the only place repairs learn to hold. The room exhaled. You could hear a grant application somewhere fall gently off its high horse. That night, when the lights were low and the kettle had done its last good deed, I sat with the little blue note beside my husband's old pen. I did not destroy the draft Jonah had mentioned because I did not have it. I destroyed something else. The tiny satisfaction I had been keeping in my pocket. The one that whispers, you were right to be offended. I replaced it with a better souvenir. A legal form, linebacker stiff with purpose, signed by a boy who is learning to be a man without needing someone smaller to stand on. And before sleep found me, I wrote a new rule in my kitchen notebook, the one with recipes and repairs and phone numbers no one uses anymore. When someone calls you too old, check if what they mean is too experienced to be fooled, too patient to be hurried, too faithful to abandon the work. If so, say thank you and keep going. The morning after the stamp found the paper, the church smelled like fresh photocopies and oranges. Lark came early, the way people come when they're afraid if they stop moving, the relief will wear off. She carried a file folder that looked too serious for someone with freckles still auditioning for permanence. She asked if she could help, and then didn't wait for the kind of permission that puts kindness in a queue. She aligned chairs so their front legs agreed on a future. I handed her the label maker, a device that has brought more people to faith than a few sermons I could name. We stood in front of the metal cabinet Evan had rescued from a school that was convinced only smart boards deserved to live. I peeled the old label off the top drawer, the one that said miscellaneous in a font that looked like it was apologizing for existing. I pressed in new letters, quiet documents. She smiled the way a person smiles when a room promises not to weaponize their story. Inside, we placed the first of many packets, guardianship templates with plain language guides, a page that explained power of attorney without scaring anyone, a sheet with numbers to call when a clerk says you need something you've never heard of, envelopes, pens that work, paper that doesn't smudge, a list of humans who answer when it matters. I wrote a sentence on the inside of the cabinet door where only the person standing close will see it. You do not have to perform competence to deserve safety. Jonah arrived with his hair trying to decide whether it wanted to be tidy or brave. He had brought donuts because sugar apologizes faster than people do. He carried a binder that used to be his armor. Now it was just a binder. He asked what first, and I told him what always. Water, then chairs. He brought a pitcher to the mercy table and filled paper cups with a concentration that would have made a judge weep with gratitude. Lark watched her brother be ordinary, and her shoulders took notes. We sat together, and I asked for the story at a pace that would not drown the teller. Lark spoke in paragraphs, which is the only way a future learns its grammar. Their mother had been an orchestra of warmth, and then suddenly not, the kind of illness that doesn't give you the courtesy of letting you rehearse your grief. Their father had practices he preferred to children, and then he was a postcard they couldn't afford the stamp to return. Jonah, who had always been good at lists, gathered their life into checkboxes until some of them checked back. He joined committees like someone auditing adulthood. He forgot that you cannot outman a wound by working late. I told them the thing my husband taught me when I was trying to grow a personality impressive enough to distract everyone from my fear. Competence is not compassion wearing a suit. Compassion does not need a costume. It needs a chair, a kettle, a pen, a cabinet with drawers that do not jam. Jonah asked if the cabinet might get him in trouble at work, where liability is a god with paper altars. I said we would stock it with templates and neighbours, not legal advice, with contact numbers and sandwiches, with the knowledge that a notary public and a witness are sometimes the only two people standing between a family and a night of unnecessary panic. I wrote a sign to tape above it. We do not give legal advice. We give company, clarity, and snacks. He who needs more, ask, and we will find the adult in the room. The adult may be you. I asked Jonah if he was ready for the apology he owed to more than just me. He grimaced with honesty. He was scared of the part where his mouth would attempt humility, and his pride would bring a fork to sabotage the meal. I said he could practice aloud to the cabinet. It has heard worse speeches and never interrupts. He took a breath and tried. My name is Jonah. I said something unkind because I wanted to look like the kind of leader who doesn't need help. I asked for speed where we needed patience. I used the word old to mean expendable. I am returning the inches I stole. The binder lost a little of its bossy posture and sat in his lap like a pet prepared to be rehomed. When evening came, the fellowship hall did what it does best. It turned air into a welcome you can feel on your skin. The circle formed, a galaxy of listening planets, and Jonah took his place not at the front or the edge, but in the reachable middle. He confessed with a craftsmanship I recognized from the way he had once sanded splinters off a table. Slow, thorough, refusing to skip the part where it would be tempting to say, if anyone was offended. He called the harm by its simple name. He apologized to me without importing expectation. He apologized to the room for making leadership sound like a small club for the loud. He said he was willing to carry chairs while he learned how to carry trust. After, a man who collects keys to buildings no one remembers needing, clapped Jonah on the back, not like a publicist, but like a neighbor. A woman who runs a daycare from her kitchen told him to come if he wanted to practice listening where the critics are all under 5 and brilliant. Lark threaded her arm through his and said something that made his face lighten like a room when you remember the side lamp exists. The envelope stayed empty and kept its job, a reminder that privacy and secrecy are cousins who should not be seated next to each other at dinner. In the days that followed, we made the cabinet real with use. A grandmother brought a letter she wanted to leave in case she could not say her goodbyes aloud. We set a tray in the nursery and let her write in a chair that knew how to keep rhythm. A man who has lived more names than he needed came to sign a paper so his partner could pick up medication when buses were unkind. He cried in a way that kept his shoulders quiet and his eyes busy. We gave him a napkin and a laugh, and the promise that if a pharmacist needed a phone call, we would be the phone call. We learned to keep a map of offices that help. The clerk who will take 5 minutes longer and never make you feel you owe him your autobiography. The librarian who knows the exact wording for the form that makes a door swing its hinge a little faster. The notary who will meet you in the morning before work and bring muffins that taste like the holiday your budget forgot. We wrote the names with permission. We kept them updated the way a gardener keeps a path visible after rain. One afternoon, Lark asked if she could start a drawer just for letters titled for after. I said yes and made tea, because there are ideas you shouldn't greet empty-handed. She printed a little guide. Write like you are standing in the doorway with your coat on, saying one more true thing. Do not make it heavy. Make it honest. Do not make instructions for a life you will not live. Make a small, sturdy goodbye and a blessing that does not hover. She placed pretty paper inside, because not everything useful must be plain. Jonah got quieter. This was the right direction for his strength. He stopped recruiting volunteers with a trumpet and started setting out 9 chairs quietly and letting the 10th be chosen by someone who needed to feel like they had arrived before the meeting can start. He listened the way a new father listens at the door of a sleeping room. He learned to ask for help without borrowing it against bragging interest. I asked him one day if the word old still felt like a sword in his hand. He held up both palms. Empty, he said, and smiled like a person who cut themselves on a tool they think they might now learn how to use properly. Sometimes old means durable. Sometimes it means patient. Sometimes it simply means here. I am trying to make it mean mentor when my mouth is tempted to say obstacle. We began to lose track of which good idea belonged to whom. That is when I knew we were doing it right. Anna brought a sign for the cabinet that looked like it had been born there. Emergencies welcome, panic optional. Evan installed a light inside the cabinet because thinking in the dark is a cruelty. Dahlia brought a box of pens and then labelled the box with a kind of fervour that made the pens stand up straighter. Ruth contributed a set of envelopes with a ribbon that did not apologize for being pretty, because dignity is also allowed to enjoy decoration. On a Tuesday, a woman in a blazer, the color of hard choices, came to tell us she'd been tasked by the city to check whether our little cabinet wasn't accidentally a legal clinic in disguise. She sat, which made me optimistic. Standing inspectors are worse. She asked questions that had the decency to sound curious instead of hungry. We showed her the templates, the resources, the snacks, the absence of advice. She opened a drawer and found a stack of little cards with numbers and kindness. She closed the drawer carefully and said she wished her office had one of these. People arrive there too late for snacks. We gave her 2 granola bars and a packet labelled, "For when the copier jams and your soul follows." She laughed into her hand and called us later with the name of a notary who sings. It felt like a treaty. When the pantry project came back up for review, Jonah did not present it. Lark did, not because we wanted a sweet story to sell funding, but because she lives the hunger that asks for shelves. She spoke with the steady grammar of someone who has balanced a checkbook on a bus. She proposed a small thing, a shelf labelled tonight, right next to someday, so that people who can't plan past 6 p.m. do not have to audition for deserving help. The room voted before anyone could waste the courage she had spent to say it. "Approved," the minutes said, and then the minutes tried to act bored. We did not let them. The rumour at Jonah's work died the way fires stewarded by gossip tend to die when the wood is retrieved for building. He did not get a promotion. He did get a desk plant that lived. He measured his progress not by title, but by how often his emails ended in "thank you" without a request stapled to it. He sent me one that simply said the cabinet worked today. I replied the way you reply to a sunrise picture you didn't personally order. Yes, it did. Occasionally, the old wound would itch. Someone would use the word old in a way that asked me to step out of the way so a daydream could get its picture taken. On those days, I went to the bench with the brass plaque and read it like scripture written by a person who loved verbs. The next right thing. Sometimes the next right thing is to duck. Sometimes it is to speak. Sometimes it is to hand a young man an envelope and a pen and stand nearby like a lighthouse that does not need a parade. There was a moment I want to keep lit in a jar for the rest of my long life. Lark, binder of practical papers under her arm, stopped in the doorway of the nursery. The rocker, empty, leaned a little as if listening. She touched the doorframe the way family sometimes claims a place. "Thank you for not opening it," she said. And I knew she meant the envelope, and also the question of my age. Thank you for staying old in the way that holds, not in the way that closes. We celebrated not with cake, but with file folders that didn't stick, and 4 new chairs whose legs did not wobble. I made lemonade that tasted like learning to tell the truth about how much sugar you put in. Jonah brought bread that he had baked using a recipe he had written on the back of a printed agenda. It rose, as have we. That winter we installed a small metal slot beside the cabinet where people could slide sealed envelopes labelled for after without having to announce their planning to a room that might misunderstand. We promised to keep them dry, to release them to the right hands at the right time, to destroy them if asked, to never count how many made us cry when we touched them. I slid one in myself on a Tuesday afternoon when the sky had borrowed its colour from an unmade bed. It said for Eva, "When my stories need a new voice." I didn't tell her. She will discover that small mercy when she needs it. Jonah asked if he could start a tiny scholarship for filing fees, the kind that vanish from couches and matter more than speeches. He found 6 people who wanted to give $10 a month and called it the Staple Fund, because paperwork refuses to behave without the small convinces. We put a little lockbox in the cabinet that made the exact sound of security when it clicked. There were days of clumsiness, and we kept those too. Once, I corrected Jonah in front of people when I could have waited. He flinched. Later, I apologized in the exact room where my impatience had dressed itself as efficiency. He forgave me with the skill my age hasn't yet made obsolete. I watched him learn not just humility, but humor. When someone teased him about donuts being his love language, he said, "Actually, it's proofreading, but donuts have better PR." Our community changed its posture in ways small enough to hide in plain sight. At funerals, we began to keep a basket of pens near the guest book for people who remember at the last minute that they want to leave a letter at the cabinet before they forget what they meant to say. At weddings, we tucked a card in with the programs that listed the phone number for the clerk who answers with empathy, and the times our notary would be in the back room with a good pen. We did not advertise. We made it ordinary. On the 1-year mark of the day Jonah called me too old, I brought the kitchen notebook to listening night and read aloud the rule I had written under the recipe for cornbread. When someone calls you too old, check if what they mean is too experienced to be fooled, too patient to be hurried, too faithful to abandon the work. If so, say thank you and keep going. The room hummed. Jonah nodded and did not offer a speech. Lark took the notebook and added, in her neat print, "Also, if you are the one who said it, keep going too, but with softer shoes." Near closing, a teenager came to the cabinet with a sealed envelope labeled for after and stood there a long time, practicing the release. Jonah did not approach. He did not narrate. He stood far enough away that his presence counted as company, but not pressure. When the teen slid the envelope through the slot, Jonah looked at me, and I looked at him, and we did not pat ourselves. We let the quiet be the applause. I still get called too old, but now the words arrive like tourists who have come for a picture with the sign, not like thieves attempting a heist. I place their hands gently at their sides and tell them to look up. There is a cabinet in our hall that proves we are as young as our willingness to learn and as old as our patience, and those are the best ages to be. On the last night of the story you asked me to tell, I walked home with the winter moon making a good witness. I stopped at the bench, because the bench is the punctuation mark I put on days that contain sentences worth keeping. I said to the brass words, "Thank you for outlasting everyone's hurry." I said to the night, "Thank you for letting me be old in public without making me invisible." I said to my husband, who still keeps a key to my sentences, "You were right. Trust is a room, not a leash." And to Jonah, to Lark, to Anna, and Ruth, and Evan, and Dahlia, and all the chairs that have learned to be quiet without being complicit, I said what I say now into this little microphone life keeps handing me. I kept the secret because I refused to make curiosity my religion. I gave it back because a future asked politely. I stayed old enough to forgive and young enough to keep learning. And the work, oh, the work, keeps aging so beautifully it's almost a face. If you are listening with a hurt still buzzing in your pocket, you can bring it here. We have a drawer. We have a pen. We have a kettle. We have time. And if someone told you you were too old, come sit beside me. I know how to turn those words into a bench. That is the end of the story and the beginning of our ordinary. The cabinet has a night sound, soft metal settling the way a cat decides about a windowsill. When the room empties and the last chair remembers its original angle, the little lamp inside the top drawer throws a small square of light onto the floor, like a ticket stub from a show you stayed through the credits to honor. I turn it off last, after the kettle has booed and the trash has told its truth. A new rule for winter sits thumbtacked inside the door. Be precise, then be kind. In summer, I reverse them. Winter needs edges before blankets. The city liaison returned in a wool coat, the color of good advice. She brought a binder that looked guilty about being a binder. We'd like to try a pilot, she said. 3 sites: your hall, a library branch where whispers are already professionals, and a second church that believes in casseroles and signatures. I stirred my tea and watched the steam perform gratitude. Pilots, I said, are lovely, as long as nobody pretends they can fly through weather they haven't met. She laughed and took out a pen that clicked like self-awareness. Teach us your weather, she said. I wrote 2 words on the first page: slow edges. Jonah has acquired the habit of pulling 2 extra chairs wherever he goes. He says it's for symmetry, but I know it's penance he has turned into practice. 2 teens showed up with shoelaces undone and ambitions tied too tight. He taught them forms the way you teach a dance: count out loud, then hum the rhythm, then let your feet remember. Lark arrived with a tote bag that had already memorized her shoulder and placed a stack of 1-page guides on the table. Power of attorney, plain words, guardianship, emergency version. How to ask a notary when your courage is small. We keep her pages in the top drawer now, where paper learns to be useful without raising its hand. The storm didn't ask for permission. It came with the attitude of a cousin you love and dread. Power blinked, then chose nap. We lit the room with battery lanterns that refuse to be offended when you thank them by name. The cabinet lamp did its square of light trick, and suddenly everyone wanted to sit close as if reading could keep the heat in. Anna brought a pot that kept the day friendly. We read letters out loud to the people they were written for after turned into for now by the dark. A man with hands like apology read a note to himself about not leaving the garden to his sister again without asking. He folded it, slid it into the slot anyway. A promise needs somewhere to live, he said. Ethics knocked the next morning disguised as a cheerful envelope with 2 names on the outside and 1 instruction on the inside. The siblings disagreed about when and whether to open their fathers for after. Both had keys to the story. Neither believed the other could be trusted to lock up properly. I took the envelope to the bench with the brass plaque because decisions behave better outdoors. I ran a finger across the next right thing until my temper stopped auditioning for the role of judge. Then I did what experience is supposed to mean. I called the librarian who has custody of nuance. She suggested a slow accuracy. Make a copy of the outside, record the conflict, seal it in a new envelope that names the disagreement, and set a date to revisit when no one is standing on a cliff. We did. No applause. Relief nodded at us from the far booth. Listening night brought a veteran who didn't want a letter. I want a recording, he said, because my handwriting lies about my life. We set a phone on the mercy table, red dot honest, and he told 3 minutes of a story he'd been given 20 years to forget. He asked if the cabinet accepts voices. I told him the slot is neutral. He smiled with half his face and slid the phone in, sealed in an envelope with a sticky note. Play this for my boy, if he ever asks before I do. The cabinet took a breath and held it. Ruth, who can sew a metaphor into a hem without puncturing pride, began adding a small pocket to garment bags, the kind that could hide a folded letter or a bus pass. Some vows need paperwork, she said, and some paperwork needs a dress to feel brave in. She winked at me as if we were both apprenticed to a craft that refuses retirement. Jonah relapsed just a little during a Grant pitch. He built a sentence that tried to carry a parade float and a marching band across a bridge rated for pedestrians. It wobbled. He saw it wobble. In the Q&A, he took a breath and said, "I'm practicing unspectacular trust. May I try that sentence again?" He did. We got the grant because humility fits in more doors than brilliance does. On Lark's first day at community college, the bus machine decided her pass was fiction. She texted a photo of the error message with an emoji that had never met subtlety. The cabinet had already saved a PDF of what to say when the machine says no. She took the words to the window and was in class by the second bell. Her message back read the way spring does when it remembers who it is. Morning Porch launched Paperwork Happy Hour, which is exactly what it sounds like and so much kinder. Tea, forms, strangers who become translators, a bowl of lemon slices that insisted on brightness. Anna hung a sign that said, "You are not behind, you are arriving." People came late and left on time with their dignity stapled, not perforated. We audited the cabinet at month's end. We're not the kind of people who put on lab coats to count paper clips. We are, however, the kind of people who believe in names. What's working? The lamp, the slot, the drawer of for after. What's noisy? The phone list. Too many numbers that forward to despair. What's missing? A way to honour the people who come just to sit near the square of light without needing anything but the square of light. We solved 2 out of 3 and called the third a mystery that deserved more tea. Crisis visited like it pays rent. A neighbour was detained. The children needed a caregiver letter tonight. Jonah called the singing notary. The notary sang, "I can be there in 9 minutes," and was. We turned the room into a clinic without becoming one. People snapped into roles no one had assigned. Someone fetched crayons. Someone found grandma's glasses. Someone translated a tense into kindness. The letter got signed. The children slept on the nursery rug under the benevolent supervision of stuffed elephants who do not snore. The cabinet learned a new sound that evening, relief landing. A teen returned a sealed envelope and asked me to destroy it unread. Everything in me that enjoys salvation stories stood up like an eager student. I put the envelope into the tin with the matches, took it behind the church to the safe metal bowl we keep for afters that prefer ash. I burned it while the teen watched, then stirred the cooled grey with a spoon the building rarely needs. "Thank you," the teen said. They did not owe me a plot twist. Trust does not invoice. The pilot launched across town. 3 cabinets now, 1 recipe, endless local spices. The library's slot preferred voices. The second church stockpiled envelopes printed with the words, "I'm not ready to say this out loud." We agreed to 2 metrics. How many people didn't cry alone? How many chairs came back without wobbling? The city liaison added a third. How many hours saved people from waiting rooms? I offered a fourth. How many roomers went hungry? She wrote it down in that binder as if binders might learn a better religion. Rumour tried to feast on Lark. Cheap talk about how a scholarship finds a girl when a boy with a binder is standing nearby. Lark's face learned a new calm I wanted to upholster the pews with. "Name it," I told her. "Then don't feed it." She nodded. The rumour went next door to see if anyone there still kept sugar on the porch. We hosted a festival of letters because grief asked for a party with quieter music. Long tables, good pens, cookies, tissues, no speeches. People wrote for after and for now, and for I'm afraid I'll forget this kindness, and I want to remember I was brave enough once to ask. Jonah wrote 3 sentences he signed only with his first initial, and slid them into the slot like a magician returning a coin he never stole. We lost an envelope once. Panic turning pockets inside out is a slapstick we no longer enjoy. We paused. We ran the breadcrumb protocol we invented for exactly this. Look where gratitude was last expressed. Ask the room to become a memory instead of a megaphone. Check the bottom of the tote with the torn lining. Found. We logged the win on a tiny card because triumphs are shy. They need record keepers. My body knocked one night with the urgency of a neighbor you don't ignore. Sharp pain. A gallery of worst-case scenarios. It was nothing, and also a sermon. I made my own packet. For after, yes, and also for hospitalization if I'm too proud to be sensible. Jonah tried to be the adult on duty, and I let him. Lark insisted on alphabetizing the phone tree, and I let her. Anna brought cut fruit that tasted like a promise that isn't extravagant, but never fails. I slept on the couch that week with the cabinet lamp off and the bench in my dreams, reminding me that old is a biography, not a verdict. By the time the city asked for metrics with a face like a week-late landlord, I had 3 numbers ready. 1. Average wait time reduced by 47 minutes. 2. 72 envelopes accepted without a single breach. 3. 134 chairs returned steady. I added 1 sentence for their press release. We count what keeps people from disappearing. The liaison slid the paper into the binder as if it were a love letter she hadn't expected. On the last, listening night of the season, the room spoke in familiar voices. The veteran came back to say the red dot is now a friend. The grandmother returned to fetch an envelope addressed to a grandson who finally asked. The teen who burned a letter brought cookies. Lark read a paragraph about ordinary mornings that would have felt miraculous a year ago. Jonah said very little, and then precisely what mattered. I keep 2 chairs in my trunk now, he said. 1 for the work, 1 for me. We closed by not closing. We left 1 chair empty on purpose, 1 envelope unlabeled, 1 kettle with water already measured. We turned off the cabinet lamp, and the little square of light on the floor will, I am certain, be there in the morning. Like the punchline to a joke, only kindness understands. By February, the cabinet had opinions. The top drawer liked to be opened with the left hand. The second preferred labels centered, not right justified. The slot went silent if anyone raised their voice in its direction. We learned to take our instructions from furniture that had learned to be useful longer than any of us had learned to be loud. The city liaison sent an email with 3 attachments and a line I liked. We want to keep the soul, and just give it more coats for weather. I printed the attachments on the cream paper we reserve for things that shouldn't feel disposable, and took them to the bench. Brass words first, paperwork second. My ritual against hurry. The plan was simple on purpose, a shared phone number that would only ever say, "You've reached the quiet documents line," then a human, a cart version of our cabinet for pop-ups at the library and the rec centre, a tiny stipend for pens that don't betray you. I signed after the bench nodded. We tried the cart at the library on a Saturday that had already made too many children sticky. The wheels squeaked a little, as if to announce Dignity's arrival. Lark wore a lanyard she had cuter-eyed with a small enamel lemon. Jonah wore his apology like a well-fitted shirt. Present, not performative. We parked between non-fiction and the table where a chessboard was always almost set up, and I put the sign where people wouldn't trip over it with their eyes. Ask anything. We might not know. We will not make you feel small. A woman came with the walk of a person who has explained herself too many times to strangers with clipboards. I need to get a letter right so my daughter can ride with her aunt cross-state without the officer making my child explain her life. She said it like a dare. We said it like a recipe. Jonah took the form. I took the aunt's phone number. Lark took the bus schedule. The notary on speed dial took our greeting as if it had been waiting for something to love. We finished in 12 minutes without anyone forgetting to breathe. The woman took both copies and a third that said for the glove compartment, because compassion, like salt, should be present even where you don't think to reach. She left with her spine taller. I have come to believe that is the real metric. Later, a man hovered at the cart, the way regret hovers at the edge of a good room. He had a cap pulled low and a question too shy to announce. Lark turned the cart slightly so he could be brave without an audience. I don't want my brother to be the person who knows how to turn me off, he said. Hospitals will listen to first kin, and he is not my first anything. We walked him through the paper that lets a chosen friend hold your preferences when your voice sits down. He picked a friend whose first name is Joy. I pretended I didn't notice when his hands shook at the joy of it. That week, Rumour found a new snack, the one that says cabinets are for people planning to fail. I know that Rumour. It used to rent a room in my own head. We cooked it a small, unseasoned meal of reality. At listening night, I said aloud, preparation isn't pessimism. It is hospitality for your future self. A teenager with a skateboard under the chair wrote it on the grip tape in Sharpie. I pretended I didn't see him do it, then pretended harder when he left the board, leaning against the cabinet for an hour, as if letting the sentence seep in. We added a little bell, not a store bell, a church spoon balanced on a tiny ceramic bowl. When someone slid an envelope into the slot, they could tap the spoon if they wanted the room to wish them well without details. It chimed like a polite star. Once the spoon chimed 3 times in a row, and the room, now well-trained in celebration without interrogation, murmured something between amen and carry on. Jonah asked to take the cabinet's recipe to a building that did not think it needed one. The youth shelter 2 bus lines away, where the intake form had grown like ivy over a wall. He showed up with crisp packets, plain words guides, and cookies in a box labelled not a bribe, a vitamin. A staffer whose badge declared her a supervisor and her eyes declared her a poet said, "You're not here to judge our paperwork, correct?" He said, "I'm here to give it a coat you can wear in the rain." She left with 5 guides and a packet for her own mother. I keep learning that the shortest distance between bureaucracy and relief is a room where nobody is trying to win. We made mistakes and recorded them politely. A translated guide used a word that in one language meant guardian and in another meant security guard. A client showed up to a courthouse with expectations that wore the wrong uniform. We apologized with specificity, corrected the page, and printed a note at the bottom in both languages. We are learning. If this page hurt you, tell us. We will fix the page and also bring you lemon bars. Several people told us for the lemon bars alone. We fixed the page for the better reason. On a wet Tuesday, a boy left an envelope in the slot addressed to me, when I'm not scared of me. I wanted to put my cheek to the drawer and whisper a blessing the envelope could absorb through paper osmosis. Instead, I wrote a sticky note and stuck it inside the door. Dear me, I'm proud of you for mailing yourself forward. Weeks later, he returned to claim it. He wore the same jacket and a new way of standing. He tapped the spoon with a single clear tone before walking out into weather that respected him a little more. By March, the liaison asked for a tour. Bring someone who will be honest, I said. She brought her grandmother. The grandmother looked at me like a colleague. My church used to keep the important papers behind the altar, she said. Now the altar is this cabinet. I wanted to argue, and then realized she was right. Altars are where we put what we are not ready to carry home alone. We added a very small rule to the inside of the door. Never let a story pay rent in an envelope. Paper can hold instructions and tenderness. It cannot hold a person. When someone tried to leave a confession there, we slid it out gently and replaced it with a card. Confession belong to ears. Call this number. We will send 2 good ones. The person called, 2 good ears walked over. One morning, while labeling pens the way Dahlia likes, blue caps in the blue bin, black caps in the black, I felt an ache that suggested my body was rehearsing for a performance I had not called. Sharp, insistent, specific about my left side. I sat. The room reframed itself to include me. Lark fetched water with boss energy. Jonah, steady as a metronome, said, "Emergency, not drama," and drove me to the clinic in a car that usually smelled like ambition and now smelled like lemon wipes and courage. It was nothing big, which is a sentence elders are too fond of and doctors are too cautious to believe. But on the way home, I stopped at the cabinet and slid into the slot an envelope addressed to Eva, if my voice goes hoarse. Inside, instructions written kindly, not bossy, how to water the violets, where the cornbread recipe hides, which hymn manages my breathing, where to find the story I've never told, because it isn't mine alone. That night, Jonah stood in the doorway with his apology face even though he had committed no sin. "I am practicing not imagining life without you," he said, "and also practicing not making you immortal, because that is not your job." I handed him the rule I'd thumbtacked to my spine. Be precise, then be kind. He repeated it like a new language and set 2 chairs facing the cabinet as if the cabinet might need company. Maybe it did. The pilot's library branch reported its first statistic worth engraving: pairs of strangers who became useful to each other. 19. Not clients, not cases. Pairs. I wrote it on a paper heart and taped it to the inside door next to the spoon. It fluttered whenever the slot inhaled courage. An older man with a cane lived near the bench. He came in sometimes to sit by the cabinet and tell it he remembered when papers required a tie, not a truth. He brought a photograph of himself in a uniform that had done its best to make boys into men and handed it to me with a shrug. "I used to keep secrets that didn't deserve me," he said. "Now I keep only the kind that are waiting for a moment to bloom." We slid his picture behind the drawer on purpose so the cabinet could feel guarded. Rumour, starved by our disinterest, tried one last flourish. The cabinet makes people lazy. I hosted a Saturday called Chores and Forms. You could fold laundry and finish a healthcare proxy in the same 20 minutes. Music on the small speaker was polite. Gossip had to wash its hands before entering. We had a record turnout. I am not above tricking dread into productivity. On a raw morning when the wind picked up every conversation and tried to finish it rudely, the singing notary arrived with bad coffee and good gossip. "Your cabinet is making my job easier," she said. "Half the time the paper is already filled in and nobody is weeping. I almost feel unemployed." I offered her a lemon bar and my gratitude, both of which stick. That afternoon, a woman in a bright scarf came with a question that looked like an unwrapped package. "Can the cabinet keep joy?" she asked. I said we had not tried. She pulled out a card that said, "Open when you doubt you are loved," and addressed it to herself with a grin that would not apologize for optimism. She slid it in and tapped the spoon twice, a near chord. Weeks later, she returned on a grim day and retrieved it. "It worked," she reported. "I wrote better love letters to me than my last boyfriend ever did." The room applauded by continuing its business with slightly more tenderness than strictly required. The cart visited the rec center where teenagers perform gravity negotiations on wheels. Jonah set up next to the sign that said "No outside drinks" and placed a cooler of water beneath it, unbothered. A boy skated over, pointed at the cabinet on wheels, and asked, "Is this like a save point in a video game?" Jonah said, Exactly it. And the boy nodded as if he had suspected kindness might eventually learn his language. We began keeping a small ledger of after, the moments when a letter or packet had done its job and then gone on to do a second job we hadn't anticipated. A woman read her late mother's for after and decided to write one to her own daughter that said, "Here's how to fix the leaky sink without waiting for a landlord who is allergic to phone calls." A man used the guardianship template to give his neighbor the right to pick up his kid from daycare, and then used the leftover paper to write a list of bedtime stories that work even when dinner is late. Paperwork creating bedtime. What a plot twist. On a slow Wednesday, Jonas, yes, there is another Jonas, with an S, came in with a guitar case and a question about names on utility bills that did not match the names in his pocket. We called the electricity company together. The voice on the other end sounded like it had forgotten Saturday exists. Lark asked a series of plain, precise questions, each ending with a thank you that did not require politeness in return. The voice softened, the form appeared, and Jonas left humming. Later, he sent a photograph of a light bulb turning on with the caption, "Proof of concept." We do not pretend the cabinet is magic. Twice we stood in a doorframe with our hands open and could not make the system behave. On those days, we went to the bench and let the brass words absolve us of omnipotence. We ate soup. We tried again the next day with new verbs. A letter arrived without an envelope at all. A folded page tucked under the door, addressed to the adults who keep sitting here. Even when it's boring, it thanked us for being predictable. I put it on the inside of the cabinet door, where only we would read it, so we wouldn't get clever and ruin the effect. In April, the city asked if we could present at a breakfast where bagels and PowerPoint perform an uneasy duet. Jonah made 2 slides. Lark made 1 page of bullets that refused to brag. I brought the spoon and the bowl. When it was our turn, I rang the spoon once and said, "That sound means someone trusted us." Then I told 3 stories, none of which used the word client. The room stood up because sometimes even bagels know when to clap. When the breakfast ended, a man from a neighborhood we used to mispronounce correctly asked if he could borrow our recipe. "You can't borrow a recipe," I said. "You can steal it with our blessing." He laughed and wrote "steal" at the top of his notes. 2 months later, he sent a picture of a drawer with a lamp and a sign in his language that said, "You're on time." Near the end of spring, I found myself standing in the hall at dusk, counting chairs the way some count sheep. We have enough, I thought, surprised at the relief that sentence carries. Enough chairs, enough pens, enough neighbors who say who know where the kettle is and how to apologize without auditioning for sainthood. The cabinet clicked its little lamp off with the timer, and the square of light faded. I did not worry it would fail to return. I walked home past the bench, touched the brass, and said out loud to the person who first called me too old, and to the one who will surely do it next, "I am old at keeping faith. I am young at learning. And this room, this cabinet, these ordinary papers that turn into courage when you hold them, this is the part of my age I refuse to retire. Tomorrow we will refill the envelopes, replace the ink, sharpen the pencils because some people prefer to write a future that erases gently. Jonah will forget the donuts and bring cut fruit. Lark will file a receipt underneath a blessing. Anna will put the kettle on as if it were a sacrament. The spoon will chime once, maybe twice. A stranger will leave less of a stranger. And somewhere, a rumor will go to bed unfed. If you are still listening, bring your doubt and your paperwork and your very human hands. We have a square of light with your name on it. The next right thing looks like a drawer that opens,